notion that a lot of the times women get sort of put down for the sort of equality work. We sort of made a point about it at our last NPL diversity group, where the women vastly outnumber the men, which normally at NPL I'm the only female in the room for meetings. So it's one of those things where I wanted to raise the question as to how you think we can sort of naturally progress towards getting people involved that wouldn't normally get involved in diversity work, and how you get, you know, those male champions into the room as well.
Sorry about the mic acrobatics.
No, it's fine. I was going to ask. Okay. Yes, I mean, I think part of the issue is making the case that the equality work is as of high, you know, as of equal value as other types of work within an organisation. And I mean, as Pete here said, we all need allies. I mean, it's absolutely crucial that when you're working in any equality area, that you actually build up your allies network and make the cases to people. The value of journals, it comes from very much a point of it's about good working practices for all, and I can't emphasise that enough, so that it gets over that whole you're doing something different for women, and actually what we do is really sell the benefits of being more transparent across an organisation for everybody, because then that allows all your talent to continue to rise to the top and not just kind of the golden boy in the corner, if you know what I mean. So, I mean, I just would really talk about transparency, openness, good practice for everybody, no matter who you are, rather than kind of try and make it a, you know, one diversity box here and one diversity box there, you know.
Yeah, can I jump in on that and say, I've always, when I've been out talking to people, said for me, you sort of D&I and all of this, it's not about thinking about the individuals, it's about equality of opportunity for everybody, with no barriers to anyone and to their progression. Really, I mean, obviously, I've worked part-time in the past, and I've spoken about working part-time, and a lot of our fellows are working part-time. And I think it really is maybe turning the argument on its head in your organisation to say it's about equality for everybody with no barriers, rather than, you know, encouraging, you know, groups. But then that's just my personal opinion, obviously. But I think that's maybe one way. And the other, possibly a little simplistic way of making sure that men do those roles, is just make sure they do them. Don't give them an opportunity to opt out. When roles are allocated, they're allocated, and don't let anybody say they won't do that role for any reason. So there just shouldn't be an option to not do it.
So this is probably a question better targeted at Helen and Peter, but to the whole panel, please. It feels like there's a kind of an issue around invisibility coming through from your presentation. So I just wanted to pick up on that and sort of ask the question of, you know, what do we do in the circumstances where you find or you suspect that there could be a dyslexia issue, there could be, you know, a sexuality issue, but as a manager, are you the one that asks that question? You know, how do we draw out these invisible barriers or opportunities? I'm not quite sure how to phrase it, but do you get what I mean? Yeah?
I've got a big voice, it's fine.
It's for the recording.
I'm used to doing shouting. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, and it's something that we're asked a lot. I think, you know, following the lead from sort of what we've done with other organisations, is having sort of an organisational approach of having sort of open events that actually start to generate discussion around these issues. So there's been a number of people we've done them with more recently. I'm doing one tomorrow with another organisation where they're not really saying, you know, or you lot, we know you're here, show yourselves, because that wouldn't be very nice. But it's actually more a general sort of awareness raising session. So we do sort of stuff at lunchtime, for example, which is what I'm doing tomorrow. And what we find with those is that you get a really diverse audience. So you'll get people who are dyslexic, who are employed within that organisation. You'll also get individuals whose children are dyslexic, who want to come and talk about issues with those. So it's just about putting it on the agenda. I think once these things are on the agenda, then it starts to stimulate discussion internally. Having sort of training sessions for managers just to raise awareness is really, really useful. And what that does is it gives them the tools to actually raise that with staff members, and where they maybe notice issues that are emerging or things that they hadn't really considered. It can be very useful to have that confidence, I think, to raise that with an individual, say during appraisals or performance discussions, to say, well, you know, I had noticed, had you ever thought? So I think what you're asking is a really sort of common thing that we get from line managers of, how do I ask that question? And I think asking it in a way based on a sound knowledge base for yourselves, actually for a lot of our dyslexic adults, is a huge relief. Many of the adults that I work with, when they sort of have disclosed, will come forward and say, you know, I've spent my life feeling that I've kind of got into this job by accident, that I'm kind of waiting to be found out. And actually having that open discussion means that you can move forward both as a manager and as an individual. Does that kind of help? Yeah.
Yeah, just as in with neurodiversity, like there will be LGBT people in your organisation, you know. So it's not a case of kind of if they exist, it's a case of they do exist. You don't necessarily know where they are, but that's why I think in the first instance, when people say, what's the very first thing that we should do as an organisation, I will always say, make your intentions clear as an organisation, make your values clear and be explicit about that, including sexual orientation and gender identity, diversity. Because if there is just 1% chance that you might suffer some kind of retribution or kind of recourse to coming out about your sexual orientation or gender identity, you are very unlikely to actually come out about it. When you think about people who, for example, are estranged from their homes, when you come out to your parents when you're younger, for example, if you think that there's just 1% chance that they might react really badly and you might be homeless, you don't do it because you're concerned about your security. And I can speak, you know, from personal experience in that. And it's the same with workplaces. So just because somebody might not be kind of somebody isn't allowed to be fired, for example, from the workplace for being LGBT anymore because they're protected under legislation, but actually a lot of LGBT people will leave unless they think that and they feel that they are embraced by the organisation and that there's sort of like not a sort of like an uncomfortableness about their identity. So it's really important for organisations to recognise that there will be people there who are LGBT and therefore visibly signal somehow that they're inclusive of LGBT people. So many organisations do this by encouraging people to have kind of statements at the end of emails, for example, email signatures saying I'm an LGBT ally, or they will do it through sort of raising a flag on the top of their building to sort of signal celebration of LGBT History Month. So there's many ways in which an organisation can do it, but if you don't visibly signal in tangible ways, LGBT people will have no idea whether it's kind of safe or appropriate or suitable for them to be open about their identity. So you just have to make it very, very clear.
This is a question for Jenny. Our organisation was a proud sponsor earlier this year of the International Conference on Women in Physics. And one of the comments I'd received from various colleagues was that it had given physics a really fantastic platform, an inspirational one, and created quite a lot of visibility amongst women. So are there other events planned this year? You did touch on that sort of thing, both at a local and national level, so that we can keep the message going, the momentum going?
Yeah, it was a fantastic conference. And for those that don't know, the International Conference had Malala Yousafzai come and speak, which was just an amazing event for the women in physics all around the world to hear such an inspirational young woman talk about the importance of education in all its forms for people around the globe. I mean, I think we want to do quite a lot of follow-up work to kind of build on the conference. The International Union of Pure and Applied Physics, who sponsors IUPAP, have committed to running another conference, which is great. And actually what they've committed to doing is having some ensuring that future conferences, not just the women's conference, but actually all the conferences, there's an undercurrent of a visible diversity of speakers at each conference. It's going to become important for them. They've actually committed to really helping to roll out the push for encouraging more women in physics globally, particularly women from developing countries where they are literally the only women in an organisation doing physics, which is obviously a very isolating experience. And the Institute wants to work with, we have an international programme that is going to be working more to help kind of connect physicists globally. I mean, that's one of the aims of the conference, is to connect these isolated women across the globe to make sure they can network in a safe environment together. So, and we want to really promote that. We're going to look at doing some more national and regional events to not just bring women physicists together, but to promote diversity in physics in all its forms. Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you.
Hello there, Paul Wilgers from the Health and Safety Executive. What do you think about how organisations should manage the intersections between all of the characteristics?
Who wants to give that one a go?
I'll start, okay. I mean, I think that if you start, so what I would say is if you start from a point of inclusion, then actually the individual protected characteristics don't necessarily matter in that way, because you're looking at how you can be more inclusive by design, how you can remove barriers across the board. So, I used to work for a disability rights charity, and actually the mantra is good practice. For example, dyslexic people is good practice for all. So actually it's coming at it from a point of view of let's try and remove barriers, different height barriers, and actually by removing the barriers, you actually move away from having to kind of put people in protected characteristics boxes and actually worry too much about, are we doing enough for, those of transgender? Are we doing enough for our black and minority ethnic employees? But actually looking at how we can be more inclusive across the board. So that's my starter for 10.
I thoroughly believe in approaching all D&I work as intersectional, but I have to sort of slightly disagree with what you just said in that. Well, I think you have to identify the things that do cut across all protected characteristics, but then I think you also have to then cast a particular sort of magnifying glass on protected characteristic specific barriers. So you're absolutely right that this is all about removing systematic barriers for people. But I do think that some of those barriers are distinctly related to disabilities, for example. And I think some of those barriers are distinctly related to transgender people, for example. And I think you've also got to think about deficit as well, right? So I think the transgender community is a really salient example in this, in that the majority of workplaces are not inclusive of transgender people whatsoever, at all, in all sorts of ways in which they can't even imagine, because this hasn't even been a discussion item, right? It hasn't even been on the table. So whilst I absolutely think that you have to look at inclusion across the board, I do think you have to shine a particular spotlight on different protected characteristics to fully understand what the experience of those people are as a community. Now, the kind of caveat to that is that within that community, they will of course be diverse in lots of different other ways. So if you are looking at LGBT inclusion work, for example, broadly, but actually your LGBT inclusion outreach is exclusive of BAME communities, black and ethnic and Asian and minority individuals, then you're completely neglecting the fact that there will be LGBT people who are also BAME, and so you're completely failing in your mission. So you do absolutely have to approach this in a mindful way across protected characteristics.
Do I have to? Okay. Do I have to have my bit? I mean, I tend to agree with you completely. I suppose I take a very naive and maybe simplistic view. I think even within sort of things like neurodiversity and dyslexia, I think everybody right across the sector of all of these areas are unique. And I think the key issue here is that we don't put people into boxes, and that we just regard everybody as being unique and an individual with a unique pattern of strengths and challenges. And once we get that into our headset and we start to, recognise that and appreciate that, then I think then you're looking at actually really moving things forward.
I'm Amanda Wooding. I'm the HR Director at Laboratory of the Government Chemist. Naturally, my key aim and my CEO is about having sufficient talent in our business across all areas. And I think you do great presentations, you do some great work putting spotlights on all these particular areas. And yet I am hugely frustrated to hear that 20% of girls after 20 years still only doing A-level in physics. How are we going to start doing things much earlier on to help people, whatever their area, to just feel more confident of being working in the environment within ever their chosen fields? Thank you. Great question.
Hi, I'll just start to answer that with an anecdote, if that's all right. My daughter's 18, and she recently came along with me to an international conference of women engineers and scientists, and we did a joint presentation, actually, which was parent power, role models and how to get it right. And I spoke from my perspective of actually being a role model, going out there, and she spoke from the perspective of somebody who's just come through school and talking about what actually really made a difference to her and her friends. And the main thing that she said was inspirational role models and visibility of things like the books. There's a fantastic book about, 100 sort of inspirational female scientists. But I think for her, certainly when I pressed her on it, okay, what was she going to talk about? What really was the thing that made a difference? It was actually hearing and having access to role models in school, as well as just hearing about. But the other thing is they make quite sophisticated career decisions at school. And I don't think careers advice in schools is good enough. And I've heard that from her time and again. They had a day where they had companies coming in, and she went really wanting to find out information from a couple of the stalls about what they could do. And the people that they had manning those stalls just went, "Oh, I don't know, look on the website." In her words, this wasn't not mine. And she said, I was so disappointed and so frustrated. Unless you actually get people out there into schools that are articulate and can really encourage children, really things aren't going to get much better. So I'll jump off my soapbox about careers advice now. But I think inspirational role models, these fantastic books that there are out there for kids that really will encourage them and inspire them, and decent careers advice in schools. She did it. She's in a grammar school, and she did one of these surveys, said she should be a beauty therapist. She was absolutely disgusted, I can tell you.
Can I just say, so the Institute has been doing quite a significant piece of work in taking our Girls in Physics programme much more broadly and looking at whole school culture approach. And what we've found is we've had great results, really improving uptake of A-level physics amongst young girls, where we've actually challenged and talked and discussed with the senior leaders about what the whole school culture approach to gender stereotyping is, and really getting the schools to think about how they have gendered their classrooms, and how boys and girls are growing up in a very, very gendered society, and really having those discussions about, not just for girls, but for boys as well, about how the whole man-up culture has kind of gendered boys into a certain way, and how the whole princess culture is really affecting girls. And that's been the most significant way that we've managed to change that A-level uptake, is really getting that focus from quite a young age on gender stereotypes and what they mean, and how that influences, particularly when it comes to careers advice. It's another soapbox of mine, Katie, the gendered careers advice that girls and boys are also receiving. So we really need to be working at very young ages to tackle our insidious culture. It is insidious, around what girls and boys are kind of forced into from very, very young ages. Do you want to say?
Yeah, sorry. I'll get on my soapbox as well. I completely, some excellent points made by you both, and it's just encouraged me to think even more. And on a personal level, I'm not speaking as Stonewall necessarily, but I really believe that a lot of homophobia is inspired by transphobia, which is inspired by misogyny, right? So it's this idea that there are set ways for men and women to behave in society. And I remember being a kid and wanting a pink Care Bear, and my parents saying, no, you will have the blue Care Bear. And I said, but the blue one's rainy, why would I want that? I want rainbow, obviously, because that's cool. And having this argument, this intense sort of kind of indoctrination of how we should live our lives. But you'll notice at the moment, if you really kind of analyse this, the Daily Mail at the moment in its kind of rhetoric, and also all sorts of media publications actually it's across the board, are really frothing at the mouth with respect to the idea of gender neutrality and breaking down these stereotypes. So there's campaigns like Let Toys Be Toys, for example, that are removing the gender dimension from toys, trying to market all toys to all children. And similarly, in Stonewall, when we talk about trans identities and we start to talk about the fact that actually not everybody can be predetermined as male or female, it's not simple as that. Some people actually define as gender non-binary, and so these gender categories and stereotypes are deeply unhelpful, and I just totally agree with everything that's been said, really toxic in so many different ways. So I think that should be our priority.
Mine's really, really quick. Just picking up again on thinking about how much socialisation of our children has such a big impact on the futures that they aspire to, whether it's futures in science or whether they sort of see themselves in particular roles based on their particular genders. I know that some of your organisations have done a lot of work in schools, and indeed a lot of our organisations within this sector do a lot of outreach work for raising career aspirations in respect to STEM in schools. But a lot of that focus is on secondary school age, and as a parent myself, I've come to see that actually we build our aspirations for our children when they're, from the point they're learning to walk and talk, really. So I'm interested to know what plans any of your organisations might have to do outreach, perhaps in children sort of under 10 or primary school age, I guess. I'm looking particularly at the IOP on that. Thanks.
Thank you. Jenny. Okay, so the issue with primary schools is one of scale. That's one of the major issues that we face because at least secondary schools there's only thousands rather than tens of thousands of them. So the issue is how you get activities into primary schools at an age where it actually can make a difference. One of the things that in our most recent whole school gender stereotyping project that we did was we, in order to provide an ambassadorial role, we sent girls in physics into primary schools, not just to talk about the importance of physics, but to just be a girl in physics and a visible presence in a primary school. But actually the NUT has produced a fantastic, book for primary schools all around how to remove the gender stereotypes from your classroom. And I think with organisations like that, we're starting to push more open doors, and we need to be working with organisations like that rather than just ourselves going into more schools, doing more outreach, and really leveraging those organisations. It's gone for the life of me what the book was called, but it was a resource for primary schools all about just things like stop lining the boys and girls up, simple things like don't line the boys and girls up separately, don't say things like I want a nice big strong boy to move the chairs, and those are the kind of things that go on in primary school classrooms, and the books, the kind of genderisation of books, and I know I could go on forever. As it happens, I'm involved with Let Toys Be Toys, so because it's a real passion of mine with young children myself, and looking at how we really use social media to great effect to break down some of the ridiculous gender stereotypes that we have. But I'll pass it over to who wants it.
Well, we won't be doing everything. Don't mind. So yeah, we currently work with a lot of schools. We work with about 2,000 schools at the moment, and hoping to grow that. And we offer sort of trainer teacher training about kind of LGBT inclusion. But that I think the most difficult thing for the audience, often the teachers, to kind of get their head around is sometimes how do you navigate these gender neutral kind of paths. So that's absolutely kind of one of the biggest focus of the training that we do with schools, or rather the training partners. I do think that you have to start at a very young age, really ideally as young as nursery with some of these things. And it is absolutely, as Katie said, about role models as well. But I also think there's something about curriculum design as well, and seeing people being able to see themselves represented in the subject matter. So I think it's absolutely criminal, pardon the pun,